Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. So many storylines coalescing today at the Belgian Grand Prix. Verstappen fastest by a mile in qualifying, but it will be starting tomorrow way down in P11. One of the big stories though of the weekend being Mercedes. They reverted their car after a disastrous Friday, and Hamilton been on a great lap to at least be in contention for Sunday's Grand Prix. What though has gone on at Ferrari and now at Mercedes in recent weeks, where their major upgrades to their car have actually been exactly the opposite, and now McLaren once again the team in position to be favourites for tomorrow's Grand Prix. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, Yuki Tsunoda, a 60 place grid penalty for tomorrow's race because he's basically replacing every single part on the car. Verstappen is not. They could have done, to be fair, Red Bull, if they wanted to replace every part in the engine, but they decided no, we are just going to replace the ICE and start P11. And P11 is doable for Max, I think, given the pace that he seems to have. Now, for various reasons, today is, I wouldn't say it was unrepresentative how quick Max was, but it is worth saying that the setup they went for was a higher downforce version that is going to be especially good in the wet. So I don't want to take away from Verstappen's lap at all, but the feeling is that for tomorrow, when the conditions are a little bit unclear, quite possibly going to be dry, then it seems more likely that Red Bull will not necessarily be as competitive as they seemed in today's qualifying session, but nonetheless, Verstappen's progress through the fields should well be expected. How fast, how efficiently he can do that, whether he requires safety car intervention to win, that's a question, but it is an opportunity for his rival to take points out of him, and obviously McLaren will be chief among those. This is pretty funny as well. So drivers were told to stop swearing on the radio, and I don't really know why they care about this. Okay, I know why they care, but I find it stupid really, because they're the ones that choose what goes on broadcast. You know what I mean? They don't have to show the guys that swear on the broadcast, but they decide to. So, I don't know, Verstappen says, basically, if you don't like my language, don't listen and you can turn the volume down. And as soon as he put the headset on today, his first word was, well, as follows. So, Verstappen was on demon time today, I'm not going to lie. And there was a few other comments he made later in the day after his pole lap, well, it wasn't actually a pole lap, after his fastest lap of the day, that are similarly indicative. Other drama, though, because I couldn't quite get a video done yesterday, Bruno Faman is going to leave Alpine. So disaster over there, really. It's an absolute shambles. Everyone's leaving. Everyone's, calling it a day. And their team principal is going. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes at that point. But, yeah, basically it's a done deal now that Alpine are going to be a customer team, possibly of Mercedes, possibly not. But speaking of Mercedes, they brought 5 upgrades to the Belgian Grand Prix, 4 of which performance upgrades, especially changes to the floor, to the front wing, and other elements like that as well, to the diffuser. This was deemed to be a big upgrade from Mercedes, and with the intention to become even more competitive, potentially win the entire Grand Prix. That is not how things look at the end of today, and certainly not at the end of yesterday. Just quickly on Red Bull before we get back to the Mercedes stuff, how about this? There are rumours that after Sergio Perez's underperformance, and sure, Perez, a good lap today, and it puts him in a very good position for tomorrow's race. But the funny thing is that people are still considering the race favourites to be effectively either McLaren or Verstappen, not Perez. But on paper you'd think, well, Perez is front row, his teammates down in P11 in what looks like the fastest car today, surely Perez should be the race favourite. But that's not really how people see it right now, and obviously for totally understandable reasons. So there's a feeling that Red Bull are going to hold a shootout there, at least it's been described in the media, between Ricciardo and Lawson at Imola next week, and depending on the pace of those respective guys, that may be the replacement. So Yuki, for all that he's done, good work. Apparently that's not really going to matter, and supposedly Red Bull are going to basically put Lawson and Ricciardo in the car and have them do hot laps against each other, and whoever wins gets the spot in the Red Bull, which is, look, I'm sure they're going to come out and say, oh no, that's not true, that's a mischaracterization, we're just doing some filming, some testing of the car, but that's the rumour, make of it as you will. FP1 though, back to the Mercedes stuff, looked like this. Verstappen was fastest, Hamilton was P5, Russell wasn't even on here, right? So Mercedes this weekend were expecting to be a potential serious force in the battle, right? Because they had upgrades on the way, they've just done well in Hungary, they've just won Silverstone and won Austria just before that. The feeling was they're going to carry this momentum, Verstappen's way down the order, maximum, minimum P11 or whatever after the 10 place penalty for the IC, but they were nowhere FP1 and they were nowhere FP2. Russell was P6, Hamilton was P10, it was actually Norris, Piastri, Verstappen, Leclerc, so, the usual suspects showing pace at the top of the field, but Hamilton was very frustrated, understandably, that the car just wasn't really working. He said it was a bad day, the car felt completely different to what they had previously, and The questions again are raised to Mercedes, what exactly went on here, right? Because there were then changes confirmed to the cars for the Saturday, which of course was today. Verstappen reverted to the higher downforce rear wing that he used in FP1. He actually was able to take poo on flat out with that higher downforce rear wing that of course nobody else has been able to do since the W11, I'm pretty sure, back in 2020. Mercedes, by the way, took off everything of their car. I think Toto Wolff said we took off most things, but it seems like they took off basically all their upgrades here. Now, part of that may have been to do with the fact that the rain was coming in. There were going to be more questions on the conditions, and therefore they wanted something that is going to work guaranteed rather than playing around with these new upgrades. But it's quite clear that Mercedes, after all this optimism about the correlation and all of this stuff and all this talk, oh well, Hamilton, you know, has he made a mistake going to Ferrari and all this, but also all the talk about, what about Max Verstappen? Does the move to Red Bull, or the move away from Red Bull to Mercedes, make sense given the recent trends? Toto Wolff would say yes, obviously, but after this weekend so far, Toto Wolff may not have so much of a clear case, because it does not seem like Mercedes are on top of everything as they were previously, and Mercedes admitted there was a performance offset that they were not expecting, and the floor did not work as expected. Toto also said yesterday was not so good. We tried a few new things that are very difficult to analyse whether it was positive or not. Difficult to say where we stand with the pace, but of course when it rains, then things are going to change to some degree. So concerns there for Mercedes. Not a track that has at all suited their car well around Spa over the last couple of years. So maybe one that they shouldn't have expected to be that strong at, and they're not in prime position for tomorrow's race, but it's not too bad. But Giuliano Leclerc does say the Mercedes problem after the Ferrari problem confirms that when you develop, you have to avoid load peaks in very precise areas of your car, or you discover that the mechanical platform limits you, but you don't know it until you get there. McLaren understood not what to add, but what to avoid. And arguably over the last few races, they have had on average the fastest car in Formula 1. So there's something to be said for that still Mercedes and Ferrari are lacking some understanding of how to develop for these cars, because it's more about just making sure your car is as consistent as possible anywhere, rather than trying to add further downforce, which is causing some problems for some of these teams. The day gets underway, however. Stroll put it in the wall. A pretty scary incident, to be fair. Apo Rouge and Radion, obviously not the place you want to crash. Thankfully, nowadays there is more runoff area than there was previously, so Stroll's all okay, even though his car wasn't at the time. But it was Verstappen, Piastri, Gasly topping the times at the end of FP3. But it was quite clear that with this setup, Verstappen was going to be the man to beat. Joe Sargent, Yuki Tsunoda, Magnussen and Hulkenberg out in Q1. Good for Ricciardo, of course, with Yuki going out. That puts him in a stronger position potentially to get that Red Bull drive, if it is up for grabs, which it may well be. We'll see. Joe as well got like a penalty, I think, a 3-place penalty for impeding Verstappen. But he was already going to be right at the back. Now, to be fair to Yuki, of course, he was going to be starting at the back anyway, so it didn't massively matter. But still, Ricciardo would be like, well, till technically out-qualified him, of course. This was the qualifying session for Russell in Q2, and you can start to see a bit of a dry line emerging. The difficulty today was, for basically every single team, was finding out when to use the new tyres, because it was not clear at all. The conditions were wet, and they remained wet, and it was like, is it going to dry up or is it not? The rain was heavier in some places, lighter in other places, and knowing how long Spa is, there were certain parts of the track that were wet, other parts were still dry, and who knew what was going on. This was Alex Albon, though, eliminated in Q2 by 0.003 of a second. He was so close to knocking out Sergio Perez, but he did not quite. He was out in Q2 in the end for what would have been a P11 start. Of course, it's going to be P10 after the move down from Max Verstappen. But decent lap there from Albon. It was just difficult for teams like Mercedes, and I think even Hamilton mentioned this, that if Mercedes had timed it better with when they used their new set, when the conditions were actually faster, then they would have been in an even stronger position. But this was after Q2, Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell, so all of a sudden Mercedes are there. And look, the Mercedes is not going to be as fast as the Red Bull at this track with the older spec car. They were hoping the newer spec car could be, but the older spec version they've had for the last couple of rounds, that's what they used. And because they took all the parts off of the previous one, and it worked, right? Like, it's a solid car that's going to give you performance, but it's just not going to give you that much performance. And that is, of course, the problem that Mercedes are going to have to battle with from potentially now to the end of the season. But Q3 gets underway. Both Mercedes, of course, got through, but Verstappen was the one putting in the big lap times, and, no doubt around this circuit, Verstappen's a monster, and in the rain, Verstappen's a monster. He was 6/10 ahead of everybody after the first push laps, but Perez was in the mix as well. He was like P2. Sure, he was 6/10 off the pace of, Max Verstappen, which is not dissimilar to his normal delta, to be fair, but the Red Bull was finding its groove in these particular conditions. Verstappen was on fire as always, and he had a lot to prove, to be fair, today as well, and we'll see that in a second. And of course, he needed P1 because then he was going to be P11 rather than P12, P13, whatever the case is. Maybe it doesn't matter that much, but it does matter in the grand schemes of the race. So Hamilton put in a good lap to go third here. He was behind Perez, and then people started to find a way to find some time, especially Charles Leclerc. This was a particularly impressive lap. He actually said, Leclerc, that he was pretty happy with the car all weekends. He was growing into the weekends, and he felt like there was a good lap time in there within the wet. That's exactly what he delivered. To P2, that's P1 because Verstappen gets the penalty. So Leclerc sticks it on pole. Now, look, he was 6/10 of a second behind Verstappen, which just goes to show the dominance that Max has again in qualifying, again around here. I think he had an 8/10 gap last year. This time it was 6/10. Perez, though, holds on for the front row start. Hamilton ends up third. Then the two McLarens, they were quite a way off, 8/10 off Verstappen's pace. Russell was a further couple of tenths behind Hamilton here, and there's a pretty crazy stat on Hamilton I wanted to share for you guys here in a second. Russell was, Sainz was a way off Leclerc, of course, his teammate. But the key thing for McLaren is that they basically said they set their car up for Sunday, knowing that Verstappen would start down the order. Their intention is to have the fastest race car in the field on tomorrow's Grand Prix, and whether Verstappen can match them, that's another question, or maybe even go one better. Leclerc was really happy about it. I thought that was great to see. Of course, let's be honest, though, in Spa, you don't really want to be on pole in some respects. You do, but look, you're going to get slipstreamed all the way down and into Eau Rouge Radion and all the way down the Kemmel Straight into Le Combe, and it's difficult to hold the lead, as we full well know. Verstappen, by the way, was taking the opportunity to go one better. Of course, we had the criticism of Max last weekend. He was up to 3 AM sim racing, all this type of stuff. And Max says being on the sim is not so bad after all. Most people are nagging about that, because basically what he said was that he was practicing Spa in the wet on the sim, and that's why, he was able to do so well today. It was like, look, I do what I want. I've won all these world championships. I've won all these races. I know what I'm doing. These guys don't know what they're talking about, potentially including his own team, right? Because, they were the ones supposedly that told Max about this whole stuff. So, that's what he said. Last week or whatever, I drove in the rain a lot at the simulator here in Spa. Being on the sim is not so bad because he dunked 6/10 on the entire field. This is a crazy stat, which I believe is true. I think the last time Hamilton was out-qualified by a teammate in wet conditions was, I think it was Zandvoort last year by Russell, although I think he got impeded maybe. But back in 2015 Kota, I believe. But it's pretty crazy to think, because we talk about, okay, who are the best wet weather drivers? And the best drivers tend to be the best wet weather drivers. You just tend to see the difference in skill a bit more when it comes to these wet conditions. But I thought this is kind of incredible, because people look at race wins in wet-affected conditions. You look at Senna, you look at Hamilton, you look at Verstappen, you look at Schumacher. Those are names at the top of the list. But in terms of out-qualifying teammates, maybe that's a better stat to show how good somebody is. And yeah, Hamilton in wet-affected sessions has not been out-qualified barely at all in the last basically decade by his teammate in those sessions. And Hamilton was kind of upbeat about the situation. Of course, he wasn't loving it because the car wasn't as quick as he was hoping it would be over the course of the entire weekends. He did eventually, learn during the interview that he was actually third rather than fourth for the Grand Prix tomorrow, which of course made him rather happy. But as Lewis said, Max will make his way through pretty quick. I think their car is the fastest here this weekend, or at least tied with McLaren. For us, we're going to keep our head down, try and hold position. But he's going to hope for another podium. That may be his wishful thinking based on the starting grid, and we'll see the full lineup for you guys here in a second. And Hamilton says, look, when it rained, I knew there was a chance to be at the front. Those are my preferred conditions. If it was dry, we would struggle to be in the top 10, I would imagine, which is quite the indictment, really, right? He's kind of saying that in the wet, I can make the difference. In the dry, it's more difficult to, it's more car dependent, I guess. And therefore, it would have been more of a struggle. Still, you'd think they'd be good enough for top 10, although admittedly, given their pace on the Friday, it didn't exactly look great. Even Leclerc said as well, their long run pace, their sim runs, let's say, wasn't exactly looking great, was it? So that's the concern for Leclerc. He's starting on pole, but he expects to be eaten up by the guys behind, and Hamilton expects to be eaten up by the McLarens, and probably a charging Max Verstappen behind. So the start of the race, I think, is going to determine a lot here in terms of what the pace is actually looking like. Andrea Stella, McLaren team principal, does say this: we didn't want to compromise ourselves with the top speed. We wanted to make sure we have a good car to capitalise on Sunday. We are not in a bad position to have a good race tomorrow. So basically what they're saying is, look, 4th and 5th, not the end of the world, and they believe they've set up their car for success on the Sunday. So they're going for race pace over quali pace. They want to ensure that they've got top speeds to make the passes necessary on the Sunday. The Max Verstappen may not have quite as much just because he ran higher downforce, and therefore it potentially is going to be more of a challenge to get the overtakes done for Max. But still, he ended up qualifying Max in the best possible position given the circumstances of today. Quickly on the Ferrari side, Leclerc was asked the question, did you find the magic touch in qualifying again? He's like, look, I never lost it. I'm still here, and I'm still the driver that I have been. He's just been struggling with a more challenging car over the last few rounds. This then is going to be the starting grid for tomorrow. Who is the favourite for this Grand Prix? It is rather difficult to say. As I said, on paper it should be Perez, you would think, in what looked like the fastest car, was doing a solid job in it, to be fair. He obviously has second, so it's potential that he leads into Le Combe and potentially can build a gap at the front of the field if Leclerc doesn't have the pace that he doesn't expect to have. The Mercedes did not look good. I'm expecting Hamilton to probably get passed by both McLarens, and so is Norris the favourite all of a sudden? What about Piastri? Can Norris get a good start again? We saw that for the last couple of rounds be a problem for him. How far can Max go? He's got to get through Albon, Ocon, Alonso, which should be easy enough. Then you get to the Ferraris and the faster cars. That might be slightly more challenging for Max, especially if Leclerc is still leading. You know, Sainz will probably have to put up some pretty stern defence to try and keep Max behind. Whether he succeeds, that of course is another question. My expected podium is probably something like, you know, Norris, Piastri, Max, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if Perez can hold it personally, but I think that's a general feeling on the grid. There was also another interesting comment just before we close out here by Christian Horner, who actually commented on the decision of McLaren to swap the two drivers at the end of the Hungarian Grand Prix. We know that Zach Brown has been talking a lot of trash to Christian Horner Red Bull lately, and Horner basically said they should not have swapped the cars. They should have let Lando win because he is in the potential Drivers' Championship fight. So Horner stirring the pot back the other way, and tomorrow this is the opportunity for Norris, really. Like, if he wants to be a contender in this year's championship, he's got to win tomorrow's race, really, and Verstappen has to probably not get too many points. If Norris can get first, and if Verstappen ends up, let's say, 5th, that's a big enough championship swing that it feels like the title fight might be alive. If Verstappen makes the podium, and especially if Norris doesn't win, then probably we can chalk it up. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.